as we leave the church, it's the first time that I actually realize what's going on. I look over at poor old Yeshem, and she is literally shaking. Her hands are shaking, her face is ashen, because, people, she has seen a black mass. Okay, welcome back. As before, I am not a priest, but I do have a few priest analogous things to get through. So let's see how we go. This is hopefully going to be an easier video, certainly to make, perhaps to watch. It's just a little story that I call A Muslim Goes to Mass. So we have to go back to my misspent youth, quite a few years ago. I knew a woman who came from a Turkish background. She happened to be Muslim. She was a very intelligent, she happened to be very beautiful, very decent, very kind-hearted person. But one thing she really had in spades was she always sought the truth about things. She wanted to tell the truth, and she wanted to find out about things so she could know more and more about the world and know the truth of the world. So I was in a phase at that point where I was trying desperately for a last time to shoehorn myself back into the Catholicism that I was born into. Sometimes I say I was sold to Rome. In any event, it was a short-lived attempt, but it was sincere. Yeshem, as the girl's name was, she knew that I was going to Mass pretty regularly, and she asked me whether she could come along and see what it was all about. She'd never been to Mass before. I said, yep, that's no problem. I don't think there's any issue. I don't think there's any issue now. Anybody can basically go along to a Catholic Mass if they wish to, if you just sort of want to sit there quietly and watch what's going on. I told her that she probably shouldn't take communion or drink the communion wine, but apart from that, it was all good. She was fine. So the next Wednesday happened to be Ash Wednesday, and I was in town working, she was in town working. I said, why don't we meet up? We had a quick lunch, and then we headed to St. Francis Church in the middle of the city to go to Mass. Now, I am a bit of a dipshit at the best of times. We walked into the church, and I really didn't think about it very much or notice what was going on. But for Yeshim, this was a very, very, very confronting experience. This is partly because in Islam, as you probably know, there is a ban on idolatry. I understand certainly within mosques and holy places, you're not allowed to depict human beings or anything like that. That's why mosques are often decorated with stylized writing or geometric patterns, that sort of thing. Quite beautiful, I think. But anyway, so I just walk in there like an idiot. But it was terribly confronting for Yeshim. So I'm just going to give it to you through her eyes. Firstly, up the very front of the church, she notices not one of those clay crucifixes, but a very brooding and doom-laden oil painting of the crucifixion. So you see poor Jesus Christ up there being tortured to death, bleeding, sweating, the whole thing. It's an absolutely appalling image. And then as she looks around the church, she sees what we call, quite glibly sometimes, the Stations of the Cross, which are just a step-by-step depiction of every part of that poor man's torture and death. He keeps falling down, they're crowning him with thorns, they play dice for his clothes. It's a very early form of a snuff movie. I've heard that said before, and I think it's quite correct. You just see this poor man tortured at every stage, and then he ends up on the cross up the front, eternally dying, eternally being tortured to death, never being granted actual death. He's just dying for all eternity. This would have been bad enough, but then Yeshim sees these people, they're getting up and down and kneeling and doing this sort of thing. Now, that's okay. For a Muslim person, they're used to seeing prostrations and those kinds of things. She thinks, okay, that's kind of okay. But then we start standing up, and in drone-like voices, we start reciting all of these affirmations and professions of faith. And she hears us all say the creed, all standing up like zombies. We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen. And just on and on and on. Obviously, these people aren't engaged with it. They don't really know what they're saying. They're kind of like zombies. And it gets worse. So eventually we reach the point of the Mass where the strange man up the front, the strange, unnatural, sterile, celibate man with his strange clothing, all sorts of arcane symbols all over him, strange colours. He gets an idol representing bread, or an idol of bread, and he says these strange magical incantations over it, and then he elevates it in front of the congregation and declares that it has become the flesh of our Lord Jesus Christ, the flesh of a dead God or a dead man God, the actual flesh. And for anybody who says, oh yeah, it's just symbolic, it isn't. In the Catholic Church, the doctrine of transubstantiation still applies. That has become the actual human flesh that Jesus wore when he was upon the earth. And then this strange man does the same thing with an idol of wine. He says his magical incantations over it. He raises it up as an idol in front of the congregation, declares that this has been made and transformed into the actual blood of Jesus. We're talking human flesh and human blood transformed from these idols of bread and wine. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, all of a sudden, these zombies who'd been reciting these zombie prayers start to zombie-like move towards the front of the church, and they eat human flesh and they drink human blood. And then as a final pièce de résistance, because it's Ash Wednesday, we do the same thing. We zombie file up again to the front of the church, and this strange man dips his thumb in some ashes and wipes a big ashen cross across the forehead of each of the people there, including myself. I was up there getting the ash. And I sort of stagger back to her, and I've got this horrible black mark of Cain right across my forehead. And then, with a few more incantations, the Mass ends. As we leave the church, it's the first time that I actually realise what's going on. I look over at poor old Yeshem, and she is literally shaking. Her hands are shaking, her face is ashen, because, people, she has seen a black mass. And as soon as I saw how horrified she was, how appalled she was, how terrified she was, all of a sudden, the veil was lifted from my eyes, and I saw this terrible, terrible ceremony through the eyes of an innocent person who'd never encountered before and hadn't been brainwashed to think that this was normal. You've got an expressly cannibalistic death cult having its ceremonies in these basically torture chambers with all these representations of torture. This is a black mass. This is a cannibalistic, satanic ritual that is absolutely appalling to anybody who has the least eyes to see it. Now, anybody who disagrees with me or says, oh, no, that can't be, you're welcome to go to any Catholic church in any part of the world this coming weekend. As long as you just sit there quietly and don't make a disturbance, you're perfectly entitled to be there. And you will see exactly the same thing occur. You'll see a black mass. You'll see a satanic, cannibalistic ritual, eating human flesh and drinking human blood in an atmosphere of torture and death and the glorification, the profane glorification of the death of an innocent man. This is, everybody, and there's no doubt about it, this is a death cult. I mean, it's an express, obvious death cult. The holiest day in the calendar. It's called Good Friday. Why is it so good? Because Jesus was tortured to death on that day. Awesome. Now, the beauty of this view of the Mass is that when you look at the history of the Catholic Church, it has the most appalling, disgusting, disgraceful, brutal, inhumane track record of committing vile and disgusting crimes against humanity for the whole of its history. Let's say the last 1500 years when it really got going. I mean, if you need an example, you probably have seen here, this is Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc was murdered by the Catholic Church at the age of 19 for nothing more than having genuine spiritual visions, or at least to her they were quite genuine, and having the confidence of those visions and the courage to speak up about them and then take action in their direction. Now, she might have been mistaken, she might have had a mental illness, but there is no doubting her courage, there is no doubting her commitment, there is no doubting her decency and her honesty. And if you want to see a terrible, terrible event in the history of the Catholic Church, go and look up the trial of Joan of Arc. Her responses to these tricksy inquisitors who were trying to trip her up, they'd ask questions that had no right answer, any way you answer is wrong. Her answers were lucid, they were direct, they were clear, they were honest, they were highly intelligent, and they also had a nice kind of combination of conviction and belief in the things that she had seen and felt, but a humility to say, well, I'm not 100% sure that these did come from God or wherever. This is what I saw, this is what I felt, I believe in them, but I can say no more than that. And yet they put her to death irregardless of that. Now, we're talking about something that happened in the 1400s. You want to go back in the history of the church, you want to go forwards in the history of the church. One of the most disgusting episodes in the history of the Catholic Church is the Albigensian Crusade, the crusade against the gentle hippie Cathars. Absolutely appalling. There was one incident that's become very famous, and you probably have heard about this, where the captain of the army came back to I think he was the bishop, he might have been a cardinal, he's certainly the churchman, the Roman Catholic clergy who was responsible for the campaign, and he said, look, there's 20,000 people in that city. I cannot tell the heretics from the faithful people. And that admirable man of the church says immediately, kill them all, God will recognize his own. You just have to go back through the history of this church. It is a ghastly criminal organization. It always has been. Any part of history you care to look at, they are murdering people, torturing people, burning people at the stake, crusading against people, pogroms, for example, against the Jews, the appalling treatment of Jewish people by the Catholic Church. Christopher Hitchens has a really lovely little video where he talks about the crimes the Catholic Church they haven't apologized for. I'll see if I can put a link in the video. When you really look at the rituals that the Catholic Church have engaged in, and they're never hidden it, it's been the whole time, and you look at their appalling history, it all makes perfect sense. I mean, Jesus may have been a gentle carpenter type character, the Beatitudes, blah, 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 but the Catholic Church is very far removed from that kind of ethic. They are an explicitly cannibalistic death cult. They glorify torture, and you just look at their mass, you look at their history, and you go, oh yeah, that all makes sense. Makes perfect sense. There's no doubt there. Oh yeah, yep. Cannibalistic, insane, satanic death cult. There are people who kind of like the Dan Brown crowd who very worried about all these secret rituals. They say, oh, the Vatican's got all these secret rituals, and oh, you know, that happens down in the basement, and I think I know what's going on, secret books and secret items and magical images, and they drink the adrenochrome of babies, and they do this and that, and blah, blah, blah. It's all satanic, yada, yada, yada. I think that's just a crazy kind of a view, because you don't need to go down to the bowels of the Vatican to see all of that stuff. That is completely on the surface. You can go down to your cheerful local Catholic church on any given Sunday, and you can see a satanic and black mass in an atmosphere of torture involving the consumption of human flesh and human blood. I mean, it's right there in front of you. Don't have to go down to the Vatican. It's right there. Just Google Catholic church near me Sunday mass times, and you can go down there and you can have a look. It's right there in front of you. this is one of the ways that religions trick you and trip you up. They do it in plain sight. And people think, nah, that couldn't possibly be so obvious. No, they wouldn't do it like that. Oh, it's got to be hidden, it's got to be hidden. No. Just go and have a look. It is right there. Now, the last thing I would like to say about this is that there's never a single view of anything. Carl Jung said that everything has two sides, everything has two facets. And in the Catholic Church, there is something very, very important that needs to be said in conjunction with what I'm saying now. This satanic, cruel, cannibalistic, death cult aspect of the church is a kind of a calcified outer shell that has developed around the church and its devotions. It's made out of priestcraft. It is presided over by, as I was saying, unnatural, sterile, celibate men who don't have relationships with women or anybody else. They are lonely, angry, disconnected, and they have created this horrific institution that has done horrific things. But at the very heart of the devotions of the Catholic Church, there's a completely different personage. There's a completely different flavour. I'm going to say it very clearly. The Marian devotion, which is at the heart of the Catholic Church, is entirely different from any other kind of devotion in any other religion that I'm aware of. Hinduism may head in that direction a little bit, but I don't think it's anything like this. There is a goddess right at the heart of this religion. There is an incredibly powerful female figure to which people give their consistent devotion. She is invested with all kinds of names of power. You would have heard so many of them. You might have heard her called Star of the Sea, God-bearer, Mother of God. You might have heard her called the Container of the Uncontainable. And in my view, the Catholic Church is some kind of Ark of the Covenant. It is this calcified outer shell of disgusting and depraved and crazy priestcraft. But at the very heart, and this is the very important thing to all of the humble people of the Catholic Church, there's this devotion to Mary, this Marian devotion, which is completely different from any other aspect of any other religion that I am aware of. And I have a very, very strong feeling, a very strong, I'd even say conviction, that this feminine force, this great mother, you might call the goddess, Gaia, Mother Earth, any of these things, I think they're all one and the same force, although it has many, many facets and many, many manifestations. I think this force is about to break free of the priestcraft and just come streaming back into the world. And when I say that the only gospel is love one another, I feel very, very deeply that if Mary were to promulgate a gospel, that would be the basic substance of it. That people should be kind to each other, they should care for each other, they should be generous, hospitable, friendly, warm, affectionate, all of those loving things that makes the world a better place. All right, so that's about it. I am not sure how many more videos I'm going to do. It just depends on what work is to be done. I've promulgated the gospel the best that I can. There's not much more to say about it. And I just suspect that maybe what my job will be in the future, hopefully not for too long, to push back against a few crazy ideas, to kind of expose some more of these lies and these pretenses. And yeah, maybe open the way a little bit more for her love to come streaming back into the world. Thank you.